January 17th, 1940, Burbank, California. The winter sun cuts low through the haze of the San Fernando Valley, casting long shadows across a sprawling aircraft factory where the hum of machinery never ceases. Inside Building 82 of the Lockheed Aircraft Corporation, a solitary figure stands before a drafting table, his hands stained with graphite and ink. The air smells of machine oil, sawdust, and the acrid tang of Hanji flux. Clarence Leonard Johnson, known simply as Kelly to those who work beside him, stares at a blueprint that has been rejected 7 times by his own company's management. The paper is worn at the edges from repeated folding and unfolding, marked with red pencil corrections that span months of revisions. Outside, the world is already at war. Poland has fallen. Britain stands alone against the Luftwaffe's relentless bombing campaigns. Yet here, in this sunlit corner of Southern California, a different kind of battle is being waged. One fought not with bullets and bombs, but with slide rules, wind tunnel data, and the stubborn refusal of one man to accept that his vision is impossible. Kelly Johnson is 30 years old. The son of Swedish immigrants who settled in the frozen mining town of Ishpeming, Michigan, he learned early that survival required ingenuity. His father worked underground, extracting iron ore from the earth, returning each night with lungs blackened by dust and a body bent by labor. Young Clarence built model airplanes from scraps of wood and fabric, dreaming of flight while the snow piled high against the windows of their modest home. He attended the University of Michigan on scholarship, studying aeronautical engineering at a time when aviation itself was barely 2 decades old. His thesis on wind tunnel testing caught the attention of Lockheed's chief engineer. And in 1933, at the height of the Great Depression, Johnson traveled west to California with $43 in his pocket and a single suitcase containing everything he owned. Now, 7 years later, he has become the company's youngest senior engineer. But recognition has not brought acceptance. His latest design, a twin-engine fighter built around a revolutionary tricycle landing gear and powered by twin turbo superchargers mounted in the tail, has been dismissed by management as too radical, too expensive, too far beyond current manufacturing capabilities. Build what the army wants, his superiors tell him. Stop chasing fantasies. Yet Johnson cannot let it go. He has run the calculations 100 times. He knows what this aircraft could do. He knows that somewhere across the Atlantic, German engineers are pushing the boundaries of speed and altitude with their own designs. He knows that if America is to defend itself against the gathering storm, it will need more than the lumbering bombers and outdated pursuit planes currently filling the Army Air Corps' inventory. It will need something revolutionary. The American military establishment in 1940 does not believe in revolution. It believes in incremental improvement, proven designs, and contractors who deliver on time and under budget. The Army Air Corps has spent the last decade developing the doctrine of strategic bombing, the idea that fleets of heavy bombers, bristling with defensive machine guns, can penetrate enemy airspace in daylight and destroy industrial targets with precision. Fighters are seen as secondary, useful primarily for defending air bases and escorting observation planes. The prevailing wisdom holds that bombers will always get through, that defensive firepower will protect them, and that pursuit planes need only be fast enough to chase down enemy scouts. This philosophy is about to collide with reality. Across the Atlantic, the German Luftwaffe has already learned different lessons. In the skies over Poland and France, Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters have torn through opposing air forces with brutal efficiency. These aircraft are fast, maneuverable, and armed with cannon that can shred enemy planes in seconds. They climb to altitudes where most Allied fighters gasp for air, their engines starved of oxygen. German pilots return from combat missions speaking of technical superiority so overwhelming that victory feels assured. The Reich's engineers have embraced fuel injection systems, enclosed cockpits, retractable landing gear, and all-metal construction. They have built an air force designed for modern warfare, while much of the world still flies biplanes with fixed wheels and fabric wings. Kelly Johnson understands this disparity. He has read the intelligence reports, studied the photographs smuggled out of Europe, analyzed the performance data. He knows that America's current frontline fighter, the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, is already obsolete before it enters mass production. It is durable, reliable, and comprehensively outclassed by the Bf-109 in speed, rate of climb, and operational ceiling. If American pilots are to survive the coming conflict, they will need an aircraft that can match or exceed anything the Axis powers can field. They will need the plane taking shape in Kelly Johnson's mind, the plane that will eventually be known as the P-38 Lightning. But in January 1940, that plane exists only as rejected blueprints and wind tunnel models. Johnson's design calls for innovations that make conservative engineers nervous. The twin-boom configuration is aerodynamically efficient but structurally complex. The tricycle landing gear improves visibility during taxiing but requires new pilot training protocols. The turbo-supercharged Allison engines promise high-altitude performance but are temperamental and unproven. The armament, 450 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon clustered in the nose, offers devastating firepower but necessitates a completely different gun harmonization system than the wing-mounted weapons standard on every other American fighter. Every element of the design pushes boundaries, and every boundary pushed increases risk. Lockheed's management has reason for caution. The company nearly went bankrupt during the Depression, saved only by a series of successful commercial transports. Robert Gross, the president, has rebuilt the firm through careful financial management and contracts delivered on schedule. He looks at Johnson's radical fighter and sees production delays, cost overruns, and the potential for catastrophic failure. The company's engineers, men who have spent their careers building conventional aircraft, look at the twin-boom layout and question whether it will even fly. They point to stability issues, control surface complexity, and the nightmarish logistics of manufacturing something so different from everything else in the inventory. 7 times they have told Johnson to start over. 7 times he has refined the design and returned with the same essential configuration, because the mathematics do not lie. This arrangement is the only way to achieve the performance characteristics he knows the military will need. What Johnson's critics fail to understand is that he is not designing for 1940. He is designing for 1943, for 1944, for the sky over Germany and the Pacific, where American pilots will fight outnumbered and far from home. He is building not for the war that generals imagine, but for the war that is coming, a war of altitude and speed, of long-range escort missions and air superiority campaigns, of strategic bombing raids that will penetrate deep into enemy territory and require fighters capable of matching them mile for mile. He is designing for a conflict that will demand technical excellence, because the alternative is defeat. The rejection Johnson faces is not merely institutional, it is personal. He is young, abrasive, confident to the point of arrogance. He does not suffer fools, does not waste time on diplomatic niceties, does not pretend that bad ideas are good ones simply to preserve colleagues' feelings. He has alienated senior engineers, irritated managers, and made enemies throughout the company hierarchy. When he walks through the factory floor, some men turn away rather than meet his gaze. They call him difficult, temperamental, impossible to work with. They are not entirely wrong, but they are also not right. Johnson demands excellence because mediocrity kills pilots. He pushes boundaries because safe choices lead to obsolete aircraft. He refuses to compromise because he has calculated what compromise will cost in American lives when the shooting starts. In February 1940, events intervened to save Johnson's design from permanent oblivion. The Army Air Corps, watching the war in Europe with growing alarm, issues a specification for a high-altitude interceptor capable of reaching 20,000 feet in 6 minutes and maintaining 400 miles per hour at altitude. The requirements are so aggressive that most manufacturers dismiss them as impossible. But Kelly Johnson pulls out his rejected blueprints, makes minor modifications to meet the new specifications, and submits a proposal that promises to exceed every requirement. Lockheed's management, desperate for military contracts as war production begins to accelerate, reluctantly agrees to let him proceed. On June 23, 1940, the Army awards Lockheed a contract for one prototype aircraft. The price, $163,000, the deadline impossibly tight. Johnson has less than a year to turn rejected drawings into a flying machine. What follows is a marathon of engineering and manufacturing that will transform American aircraft design. Johnson handpicks a team of engineers and mechanics, isolating them in a separate building away from the main production lines. He establishes protocols that will later become the foundation of Lockheed's legendary Skunk Works. Small teams, minimal bureaucracy, rapid prototyping, and absolute authority vested in the chief engineer. He works 18-hour days, 7 days a week, sleeping on a cot in his office when exhaustion finally overtakes him. His team follows his example, driven by Johnson's relentless energy and the growing conviction that they are building something extraordinary. The Germans, meanwhile, believe they have already won the air war. Luftwaffe pilots in the summer of 1940 shoot down RAF fighters with casual efficiency during the early phases of the Battle of Britain. They fly aircraft that represent the pinnacle of 1930s aeronautical engineering, fast, well-armed, superbly built. German engineers tour factories, where Messerschmitt Bf-109s roll off assembly lines at a rate of 400 per month. They see no reason to fear American industrial capacity, which they regard as oriented toward consumer goods rather than military hardware. They hear reports of American aircraft, fabric-covered trainers, underpowered bombers, fighters with performance comparable to German designs from 5 years earlier. They watch newsreels of German armor crushing Poland and France, and they believe the 1,000-year Reich is ascending to permanent dominance. What they cannot imagine is that in a sun-drenched California factory, a rejected engineer is building the weapon that will help destroy their dreams of conquest. On January 27, 1941, exactly 1 year after Kelly Johnson stood alone with his rejected blueprints, the first P-38 prototype rolls out of Lockheed's Burbank facility. It is unlike any aircraft the assembled crowd has ever seen. The twin booms stretch back from the engines, supporting a horizontal stabilizer that spans the distance between them. The cockpit sits in a central nacelle, giving the pilot unprecedented visibility. The tricycle landing gear holds the nose high, and the entire aircraft gleams with polished aluminum skin. It looks less like a fighter plane and more like something from a science fiction pulp magazine. Skeptics in the crowd mutter that it will never fly. Kelly Johnson says nothing. He has done the mathematics. He knows. On February 11th, test pilot Ben Kelsey climbs into the cockpit and takes the P-38 into the air for the first time. The aircraft leaps off the runway, climbs like a homesick angel, and handles with a responsiveness that leaves Kelsey grinning when he lands. The test flight lasts only a few minutes, but it proves that Johnson's radical design works. Over the following weeks, the P-38 prototype shatters expectations. It reaches 400 miles per hour in level flight. It climbs to 20,000 feet in under 6 minutes. It handles smoothly despite its unconventional layout. Kelsey pushes it through rolls, loops, and high G turns, and the aircraft responds with precision. The Army Air Corps, watching test reports accumulate, begins to realize that Lockheed has delivered not just an interceptor, but a revolution. Not everything goes perfectly. On February 11th, during a transcontinental speed attempt designed to showcase the P-38's capabilities, Kelsey misjudges his fuel consumption and crashes while attempting an emergency landing at Mitchell Field in New York. The prototype is destroyed. Kelsey survives with minor injuries, but the accident gives Johnson's critics fresh ammunition. They point to the crashed aircraft as evidence that the design is flawed, that the twin-boom configuration creates problems, that the company should return to conventional layouts. Johnson ignores them. He knows the crash resulted from pilot error and inadequate fuel gauges, not aerodynamic deficiencies. He orders construction to proceed on 13 service test models, incorporating lessons learned from the prototype. The program continues. By late 1941, as America stumbles toward war, the first production P-38s begin reaching operational squadrons. Pilots trained on conventional fighters approach the Lightning with skepticism, bordering on suspicion. The cockpit is cramped, surrounded by instruments and controls that require careful study. The twin engines mean double the mechanical complexity, double the maintenance burden, double the chance of failure. The tricycle gear requires different landing techniques. The gun harmonization system is entirely unfamiliar. Everything about the aircraft demands that pilots abandon their instincts and learn new ways of thinking about air combat. Some wash out of training, unable to adapt. But those who master the P-38 discover an aircraft unlike anything they have ever flown, fast enough to catch anything in the sky, powerful enough to destroy anything it catches, and rugged enough to bring them home even with one engine. Destroyed and half the tail shot, away, German pilots encounter the P-38. For the first time over North Africa in November, 1944, Luftwaffe fighters diving on American bomber formations suddenly find themselves pursued by twin-boomed aircraft that match their speed and exceed their rate of climb. The P-38's concentrated nose armament proves devastating. Pilots accustomed to wing-mounted guns that require precise range and deflection calculations discover that the Lightning's nose weapons fire in a converging cone directly ahead, shredding targets with minimal skill required. One German pilot, shot down by a P-38 and captured, tells his interrogators that the aircraft appears to have the entire American industrial arsenal mounted in its nose. He is closer to the truth than he realizes. The P-38 becomes the symbol of American technological abundance applied to warfare. It is not a design born from resource scarcity and incremental improvement, the path German engineers have followed. It is a design that assumes unlimited access to aluminum, high-octane fuel, advanced electronics, and precision manufacturing. Each Lightning requires 80,000 man-hours to build. It consumes fuel at a rate that would bankrupt a European nation. It carries more firepower than some bombers. It embodies the American approach to war, not the careful conservation of limited resources, but the overwhelming application of industrial capacity to achieve absolute technical superiority. German and Japanese pilots, flying aircraft designed under strict material constraints, find themselves outmatched not by superior piloting skill, but by engineering, backed by an economy that can afford to put two engines where one would suffice, that can mass-produce turbo-superchargers requiring precision machining, that can install radios and gun sights and autopilot systems that make average pilots dangerous and exceptional pilots lethal. Over Europe, the P-38 becomes the long-range escort fighter that makes daylight strategic bombing possible. Its twin engines provide redundancy that saves lives. Pilots nurse damaged Lightnings home across the channel with one engine dead and the other barely running. Its range exceeds that of single-engine fighters by hundreds of miles, allowing it to accompany bombers deep into Germany and return. Its speed and altitude performance let it engage Luftwaffe interceptors on equal terms. By 1944, P-38 pilots have achieved air superiority over the Reich, and German pilots who once spoke of technical supremacy now dread the sight of twin booms diving from the sun. In the Pacific, the Lightning becomes even more dominant. The vast distances between island bases favor its long range. The tropical heat that causes single-engine fighters to overheat is managed by the P-38's liquid-cooled Allison engines. Japanese pilots, flying agile but lightly built fighters designed for maneuverability over durability, discover that the P-38's armor and firepower make close combat suicidal. The Lightning's 450 caliber machine guns and single 20mm cannon can disintegrate a zero in a single burst. Its speed allows it to dictate the terms of engagement, diving in, firing, and climbing away before Japanese pilots can react. The two most successful American fighter pilots of the war, Richard Bong and Thomas Maguire, both fly P-38s in the Pacific. Between them, they shoot down 78 Japanese aircraft, and both credit the Lightning's technical superiority for their survival. The Japanese expected to face Americans softened by prosperity, pilots trained in comfort and unfamiliar with hardship. They expected technical parity at best, inferiority at worst. What they encountered was an aircraft designed by a man who had been rejected, dismissed, and told his vision was impossible, and who had refused to accept that verdict. The P-38 represented not just American industrial capacity, but American individualism, the faith that one engineer with a slide rule and stubborn determination could change the course of war. Japanese pilots shot down by Lightnings returned to base, when they returned at all, with stories of aircraft that seemed immune to damage, that flew higher and faster than anything in the Imperial inventory, that carried enough ammunition to fight multiple engagements without reloading. They spoke of feeling outmatched not by American aggression, but by American abundance, by an enemy who could afford to put two engines on a single fighter and still build them by the thousands. Kelly Johnson's transformation from rejected engineer to legendary designer accelerates as the war progresses. By 1943, he is leading the team that will create the P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter. By 1945, he heads the Skunk Works, the secretive division that will produce the U-2 spy plane, the SR-71 Blackbird, and the F-117 stealth fighter. He will win the Collier Trophy twice, receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and be inducted into the National Aviation Hall of Fame. But in later years, when reporters ask about his greatest accomplishment, Johnson often returns to the P-38, the aircraft that almost never was, the design that 7 rejections could not kill, the fighter that proved one stubborn engineer could be right while everyone else was wrong. The P-38 served throughout the war, in every theater, performing every mission from ground attack to photo reconnaissance to night fighting. Lockheed built 10,037 of them between 1941 and 1945. They destroyed thousands of enemy aircraft, sank hundreds of ships, and flew millions of miles of combat missions. But the aircraft's true significance extends beyond these statistics. The P-38 represented a philosophical shift in American military aviation, away from incremental improvement and toward revolutionary design, away from conservative engineering and toward aggressive innovation, away from building what contractors thought the military wanted and toward building what the military would need even if they did not yet realize it. German engineers, interrogated after the war, admitted they had underestimated American technical capability. They had assumed that a nation without a long tradition of military aviation, without centuries-old defense establishments, without Prussian engineering discipline, could not compete with the Reich's technical excellence. The P-38 proved them catastrophically wrong. It demonstrated that American engineers, given freedom to innovate, could produce designs that matched or exceeded anything Europe could build. It showed that democratic capitalism, with its emphasis on individual initiative and decentralized decision-making, could generate breakthrough technologies that centralized authoritarian systems could not match. The Germans had rejected individualism in favor of collective discipline. Kelly Johnson proved that one individual, properly empowered, could outperform an entire bureaucracy. The symbolic weight of the P-38 extended beyond its technical specifications. To American pilots, it represented safety, the knowledge that their aircraft could outperform the enemy, that they flew the best fighter in the sky, that engineering excellence gave them an edge in combat. To Allied soldiers on the ground, the distinctive twin-boom silhouette meant air cover, the reassurance that the skies above them belonged to their side. To the enemy, it meant vulnerability, the knowledge that American industry had produced something they could not match, that the war of attrition they were fighting was already lost. To the American public, the P-38 became an icon of technological prowess, proof that their engineers and workers could build weapons superior to anything the Axis could field. Newsreels showed Lightnings rolling off assembly lines, taking off from Pacific atolls, returning from missions over Germany. The aircraft became shorthand for American power, a visual reminder that the nation's industrial capacity was winning the war. By 1945, as the war grinds toward its inevitable conclusion, Kelly Johnson's rejected design has become one of the most successful fighters of the conflict. But Johnson himself has already moved on, designing the next generation of aircraft, pushing the next set of boundaries, refusing to accept the next set of limitations that more cautious engineers regard as immutable. He will spend the rest of his career proving that the supposedly impossible is merely difficult. That rejection is often a sign of vision rather than failure. That one engineer with conviction can change the world. The P-38 Lightning flew its last combat mission in August 1945. As peace returned, the aircraft were retired, scrapped, or relegated to training duties. The age of jet fighters had arrived, and piston engine designs like the Lightning were obsolete. But the lessons the aircraft taught, that revolutionary design succeeds where incremental improvement fails, that engineering excellence wins wars, that rejection should inspire determination rather than surrender. These lessons endured. They shaped American military aviation for decades, influencing everything from the Century Series fighters of the 1950s to the stealth aircraft of the 1980s. They established principles that would define the American aerospace industry. Small teams with clear authority, rapid prototyping, minimal bureaucracy, and absolute focus on performance over politics. In the winter of 2001, Clarence Kelly Johnson dies at the age of 90. His obituaries list an extraordinary career. 44 years at Lockheed, 40 aircraft designs, 12 speed records, countless classified projects that transformed military aviation. But colleagues who attend his funeral remember him not for the medals and honors, but for the image of a young engineer standing alone in a sunlit factory, staring at a blueprint that had been rejected 7 times, refusing to abandon a vision that would help win a war. They remember his stubbornness, his arrogance, his absolute conviction that mathematics and wind tunnel data mattered more than institutional opinion. They remember him as the man who proved that being rejected does not mean being wrong. The war taught many lessons. It taught that industrial capacity determines victory, that logistics matter more than tactics, that air superiority decides campaigns. But it also taught something more subtle, something that Kelly Johnson embodied, that individual vision, properly supported, can achieve what committee consensus never will. That innovation requires the freedom to fail, to be rejected, to persist despite opposition. That the greatest weapons are often designed by people who refuse to accept the limitations others regard as absolute. The Germans built the Messerschmitt Bf 109 through collective engineering excellence, through disciplined adherence to proven principles. It was a superb aircraft, but Kelly Johnson built the P-38 by rejecting collective wisdom, by insisting that his vision was correct even when everyone else disagreed. And his aircraft proved superior because innovation requires exactly that kind of stubborn individualism. On a spring morning in 1943, a formation of P-38 Lightnings escorts B-17 bombers deep into Germany. Below, Nazi factories churn out tanks and guns. Above, American pilots fly aircraft that exist because one engineer refused to accept rejection. The contrails they leave across the sky write an epitaph for totalitarianism. Here is what happens when you reject individual vision, when you suppress innovation in favor of conformity, when you underestimate the power of one stubborn man with a slide rule and a dream. The twin booms glint silver in the sunlight, and the German pilots who rise to intercept them know, in that moment before combat is joined, that they are facing not just American aircraft, but American ideology made physical. The belief that individual excellence, properly empowered, cannot be defeated. This is the legacy of the rejected engineer, not just an aircraft, but proof that rejection and failure are often necessary prerequisites for revolutionary success. The P-38 Lightning flew into history as a weapon of war, but it endures as a symbol of something more profound, the idea that one person, dismissed and doubted and told to give up, can create something that changes the world. Kelly Johnson stood alone with his rejected blueprints, and he refused to surrender. Because of that refusal, thousands of pilots came home who would otherwise have died. Because of that stubbornness, the war ended differently than it might have. Because one engineer would not accept rejection, the balance of power shifted in ways that shaped the remainder of the century. The sun sets over Burbank, California. The factories are silent now, the aircraft long since scrapped or relegated to museums. But the lesson remains, inscribed in aluminum and victory, that the rejected are often the revolutionary, that the dismissed are sometimes the visionary, and that the most dangerous enemy of tyranny is a free man who refuses to accept that his dream is impossible. Kelly Johnson drew a fighter plane that 7 committees rejected, and that aircraft helped win a war. This is the power of individual vision, of stubborn determination, of democratic capitalism that allows genius to flourish despite institutional resistance. This is what the P-38 Lightning represented, not just American industrial might, but American faith in the individual, the belief that one person can make the difference between victory and defeat, between freedom and subjugation, between a rejected blueprint and an aircraft that changed history.